It's new song All We Need. You're on Vision Christian Radio. It is Neil with you, the Wednesday edition of 2020, and a conversation you might want to join into. It might be particularly concerning for you. Things we'll talk about today. It may be something that you're just catching a hold of these things and you want to lean into the radio just a little closer to pick up on some of the finer points of what's happening in our nation today. Well, there are calls today to protect Australian children from being exposed to the practices of gender clinics. Our special guest today says gender clinics are destroying their young bodies and lives. A campaign is underway calling on the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and the Attorney-General Mark Dreyfus to call a royal commission to protect and care for children by uncovering what's really happening in our nation's gender clinics. Kirralie Smith leads the organisation Binary, an organisation that aims to promote and honour the inherent differences between boys and girls, men and women, celebrating the true strength of the diversity those differences grant. Kirralie Smith has been one of those, a prominent voice standing up to the rampant campaign to de-gender Australian society, and Kirralie is joining us. Kirralie, welcome back to 2020.
Thank you for having me, Neil.
Kirralie, we're going to get into this issue and in a deeper way and some things to celebrate. You've got a whole bunch of new things that are happening and launching a new website today. It's going to be easily accessible for visitors to actually understand more deeply what is happening from that binary perspective. But I can't go past this. Something very significant and even historic has happened overnight. And I'd love to get your insight here because for some time now we've been talking about the possibility of what's coming in the Northern Territory, and overnight Northern Territory, the Labor government has pushed through their discrimination laws. We've been talking about those and in a little bit of depth, and the Northern Territory bill forces religious schools to hire staff who do not adhere to the school's beliefs. Now this is unheard of. It's in direct opposition to the Attorney-General's public statement this month that religious schools can continue to build a community of faith by giving preference in good faith to people of the same religion as the educational institution in the selection of staff. I'm just interested in your reaction to what's happened in the Northern Territory overnight.
Well, it's absolutely mind-boggling, Neil. When you look at the things that are protected, the conflation of different things, and basically they're protecting lives, which is just unbelievable. So for in my area of expertise, we're talking about sex and gender. Sex is a biological reality. Gender is a personality expression. Nobody can change their sex, and yet this Northern Territory law says that that personality expression of gender is now a protected characteristic. And so really it's terrible for Christian schools, but it's terrible for all schools, Neil, because anyone who wants to stand up and say, I believe in biology, I believe in the science, I believe in reality, will be risk falling foul of these anti-discrimination laws now that protect people who want to appropriate the opposite sex. It's just absolutely staggering that this is now law.
There's an additional element to this bill that's passed overnight. The bill also prohibits any act that is reasonably likely to offend, insult, humiliate or intimidate another person or group of people. And what that seems to mean is that a person could find themselves in trouble for merely expressing their opinion in an email or on a social media post if it offends someone. So it's around these sorts of issues and driven by what we might all call a woke LGBT agenda. What are your thoughts for the way that free speech is also evaporating even before our eyes?
Well, who measures offence, Neil? Like, what a crazy thing. It's not measurable. There's no consistency. What I'm offended by will be completely different to what you're offended by or somebody else. So there's no standard, there's no measure, there's no evidence basis for that. And so and we already see it so manipulated. I have been banned, as you know, Neil, so many times on social media platforms for stating that a man can't be a woman. Now, that's fact, but it hurts some people's feelings. And so under these new laws, I risk being penalised for stating the facts because it might hurt someone's feelings. It's really gone beyond a joke, and it's going to require citizens of Australia to stand up, to not give in to this intimidation and bullying, and to speak the truth, because it is not truthful and it's not loving and it's not kind to perpetuate lies such as men can be women.
We are yet to see this unfold, but given this sort of legislation in the Northern Territory, it may not be long. But when you say, you've been standing up and saying a man can't be a woman, and this is a defence of women's rights, you may not be able to even say that in a Christian school in the Northern Territory. That seems to be where this is headed. And that's going to create all sorts of issues, isn't it? Because schools really are a subset of the Christian church. And so you trample on the Christian schools, you trample on the toes of the church.
Yeah, well, I hope, Neil, that the school principals, the school boards, the teachers refuse to acknowledge or to submit to this very bad law. It's in direct opposition to God's laws, God's grace, God's kindness. He's all about truth. Jesus, as we've said before, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And so it's a real clarion call to the churches and the Christians in the Northern Territory and in other states of Australia to draw a line in the sand and to honour God, to love God and to love one another by speaking truth and by challenging this very, very bad law.
Now, there's a real connection. Let's just build a bridge for a moment between what's happened in the Northern Territory, what's typically beginning to happen in schools in various states around Australia, where parents don't have a whole lot of say over what their children are being taught about gender and sex, and parents being left out of the equation because kids finding their way into a gender clinic because of something they've heard in school, parents out of the equation. This comes into part of what you're talking about today, this call for a Royal Commission.
Correct. So there's so many reasons we're calling for this Royal Commission, Neil, but what we're finding is that children are being led down an irreversible and very harmful pathway that involves medications and sometimes surgeries that do unspeakable harm to young people in terms of their sterility. They will be left with no sexual function. It has bone density and brain development issues. There's so many factors, and these gender clinics are just running unchecked without studies, without evidence-based science behind them. But that's also empowering states now like Northern Territory, but Victoria, we've been campaigning very heavily there. They have their state election this weekend. And there's laws in Victoria and we're hearing reports from other states of similar schools doing this, where school staff begin socially transitioning children without their parents' knowledge or consent, and it inevitably leads down these pathways. So there must be a very urgent Royal Commission into these practices because there is untold harm being done.
Now, when we talk about that process, it's called transitioning. That's where you've got the trans agenda. You have now begun to perpetuate and collate and compile a whole lot of stories of detransitioners in Australia, and you've got a whole lot of those that are appearing now on your brand new website. Give us an insight into what your plans are with these sorts of stories.
Yeah, well, I guess forewarn anyone who wants to go and have a look at these stories. They're absolutely heartbreaking. We have to keep in mind these are real people who are very vulnerable and have suffered immensely at the hands of the transgender agenda. Most of the stories that we feature on our website or that we report on in our blogs are of, very vulnerable young people who have been enduring mental health issues, or might have autism or be on the spectrum. They may have had trauma in their life, and with very few consultations in these gender clinics, have been led down this pathway. And most of them are girls who are put on testosterone at a very young age. It's not ever unheard of, is it, that girls find it hard to go through puberty, particularly in this culture. We've had trends of eating disorders and, whether it's goths or whatever it is. There's always trends in adolescence because it's a very difficult time trying to find your identity. But now the latest contagion that's going around is for girls to want to identify as boys. These gender clinics are putting these girls onto testosterone. And it has irreversible side effects that are so harmful, so damaging. Their voice lowers, they have male pattern baldness, they have facial hair and hair in other parts of their bodies. They have body changes that are never going to be reversed. And then these young women, some young men, but mostly young women, get through the adolescent stage, come into young adulthood and realise they've made a terrible, terrible mistake. They were sold the lie that they could change sex, that they could become a boy, that their problems would be solved. They're still suffering from depression or the effects of trauma or being on the spectrum, and it hasn't solved their problems, but it's also added to their problems by giving them new health issues to deal with. So on our website, you can see some of those featured stories. It's very hard to watch. I've met some of these people. I've talked to parents of these people, and it's really devastating. And there's very little support for them in this country.
Some context here, Kirralie. If these were adults of sound minds and making their own decision to transition, they might rightly say to anyone, pull your head in, this is my decision. But what we're talking about here is children, and some of the evidence that's emerged from other nations, like in the UK around the Tavistock clinic, that children as young as 9 were being introduced to puberty blockers. So we're talking children here, and then where a parent's right sits in all of that to be able to help their children navigate those really tricky years of puberty. What are your thoughts here? The fact that it's children makes all the difference, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. As you said, adults are free and at liberty to pursue whatever pathways they want. I will put a little caveat in there that there are many adults who don't know what the consequences of taking cross-sex hormones are and feel like there needs to be more information. But this Royal Commission is particularly about practices, gender practices in children. It's really fascinating. Most people don't realise that puberty blockers, like for boys, chemical castration, the exact same medication that is given to, violent sex offending male criminals to chemically castrate them are the exact same medications that can be given to children in this country via puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones. That has devastating effects on their development. Dr. Dylan Wilson from Queensland has written an open letter. He goes into great depth about the effects of puberty blockers on children. They're being prescribed off-label. So what that means is they were initially designed for children who have precocious puberty. It's just to have for a very short amount of time to give those children time just to catch up to the other children. It's never been studied. There's no clinical trials and the rest of it for long-term use for children with gender confusion or dysphoria. So it's very concerning what is happening, and we are hearing the most dreadful side effects from these medications.
Now, just pause for a moment and let's reflect on this issue of chemical castration, because, as you say, it even sounds nice to talk about puberty blockers, but essentially the chemical castration, just the same as it has been debated now for decades on whether those sorts of chemicals be applied to violent criminals, and I think there's still a debate going on with that. I don't know what the exact details are, but the fact that these chemicals are irreversible, doing the damage that they do to the body, this is something where, as I understand it, young people are likely to have huge regrets when they come to realise what's happened to them. They'll be saying, why didn't some adult step in and give me some insight here? Thoughts here on the fact that it's all irreversible and regrets, and the courts are going to be full of these sorts of cases into the years to come if something doesn't happen?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the case. And these are real people with real lives and real families that are being devastated for the sake of an ideology in this country. And, we know that children are not allowed to drink alcohol, drive cars, get tattoos, get married. Do so many things because the prefrontal cortex does not fully develop until someone's 25. So it's even incredible in this country that we allow people to do damage to their brains via alcohol and other things at the age of 18. But at least there's recognition that that part of the brain is not fully developed. And so not only do the puberty blockers are given at a time where children can't consent to what's going to happen to them in the future, it will actually affect that brain development. So as they reach adulthood, there's going to be a whole new set of problems that come along with that. It absolutely staggers me that this one has been allowed to, that it's continuing. So we will do everything we can to ensure that there is a very thorough, rigorous investigation into these practices, because too much harm is being done to these children and their families.
Kirralie, let us in on your heartbeat here and some of the feedback that you receive around this issue, because while there is an activist element in the LGBT push for all these laws, they hate the Christians. It's like Christians walk around with a target and we need to be brought down by these groups, and that's what's seemingly happened in the Northern Territory just overnight with this new legislation. But there's another side of this too. Some people, even from the LGBT community, are actually saying, isn't this good that Christians at least are standing up, because our own children, and they're talking about people in the LGBT sector, are also at risk of all of these sorts of things as well? What sort of feedback do you get, Kirralie, from groups that are almost like opponents in an activist way, but they're in some sense celebrating the fact that at least Christians are standing up and saying, wait a minute, something's happening here that shouldn't be happening to our children?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I personally have been able to build some strong friendships or alliances with, radical feminists, lesbian groups and homosexual groups, because they also feel that they are being undermined. The whole LGB, the lesbian, gay and bisexual community, rely on biology to exist, whereas the transgender and queer and beyond rely on ideology that denies biology. So there's a real threat and internal fight going on within the LGBTQI plus community. But again, these are real people with real concerns. Women in particular are the ones who are being forced, whether it's in prisons, in change rooms, on the sporting field, you name it, to acquiesce a lot of hard-fought rights and privacy and spaces to males who appropriate womanhood. So, I think this is a human rights issue, a human issue, not just a Christian issue, not just an LGB issue. This is an issue that affects all of us. And when I speak to politicians, I say, this isn't a left or a right issue. This isn't an ethnic or a race issue. This isn't even a sexual orientation issue. This is an issue that affects children and parental rights, no matter what the colour of your skin is, what language you speak, how you live out your daily life, whether you have faith or none. This affects us all. And it's a very serious issue that I think there's going to be some politicians in this country going to have a lot to answer for with the laws that they've passed so far or are intending to pass in the very near future.
Well, listeners might like to contribute to our conversation. We'll open our talkback lines on 1800 316 316. You might like to have your say. You might have a question. You might have a comment. You might even have a critique. 1800 316 316. Kirralie Smith is our guest. She leads the organisation Binary, and some of the things we're talking about today you'll find on the Binary website. It is a brand new website, binary.org.au. Back with more in a moment. And your opportunity to contribute to a controversial conversation today, 1800 316 316 to join in. Kirralie Smith leads the organisation Binary. The Binary website is binary.org.au. And we're taking calls, 1800 316 316. Kirralie, before we go any further, let's take a call. Ursula is in Moruya in New South Wales. Hi, Ursula. Welcome along.
Oh, good morning.
What are your thoughts?
Good morning. Thank you, Kirralie. First, I want to say thank you for your work. I've been following you for a long time. And I'm glad that people are, finally standing up, not just Christians, but, other people that are concerned that the children are going to suffer from this. But I heard both of you say before, which is something that concerns me a little, that adults are free to make their choices. And I'm sorry, I can't agree with that, because when adults make their choices, their spouses, their children are going to be affected by that. Like the son of a friend of mine, his wife turned lesbian, so the children have lost their mother. The husband lost his wife. When we give adults the rights to drink, that's something we can do in moderation. But, we would all agree that you can't drive when you're drunk. And when you're on drugs, you're offered rehabilitation. So I think it's a very dangerous message to give, that adults can actually choose, and it's only the children we need to protect.
Ursula, I think, I can stand corrected when it comes to a thought like that. I agree with what you've said. It's a lot more difficult to tell adults what to do, but when our children are at risk, we take responsibility for how they will grow and develop. But Kirralie, what are your thoughts for Ursula?
Thanks for your comments and your question, Ursula. To a degree, I do agree with what you're saying, and then there's massive consequences. However, I don't think we can police, if someone wants to change their name or put on makeup or change their costume or do those sort of things. As a society, I think we can be really a lot better at identifying the consequences and how it impacts people. I have a really big problem, and I think this is what we do need to legislate against, is males appropriating womanhood and then trying to access our sports, our spaces, our prisons, our, shelters and all those sort of things. So there definitely does need to be boundaries, just regardless of age when it comes to those sort of things. But ultimately, God's given man freedom of choice, and there are consequences to all of the choices that we make as adults, and I think that we need to be having those conversations and debates. And unfortunately, the free speech issue in this country is that we're intimidated and bullied and cancelled if we speak those things. But I think that Christians should absolutely talk about those consequences as you have today, Ursula, and I thank you for that. But at the end of the day, what a person does in their own home is what a person does in their own home, and we can't police that. And I don't think, I don't see how that's possible to do. But we do need to draw very strong boundaries when someone's actions and behaviours impacts another person.
Ursula, of course, as adults, we have a foundation, don't we? As Christians, we say our foundation is in something that is immovable. It's not changing. It's God's word. It's those details and principles that we can glean from Scripture that we can say are from the heart of God. And those things are not changing. And that's when we align ourselves, when our identity is in Christ, we begin to act like and believe like Jesus does. And so we come up with these sorts of foundations that are not moving. And sometimes we call those absolutes, and we'd talk about male and female being absolute. But Ursula, thank you so much for a great contribution today. 1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation. Let's take another call. Katarina is in Adelaide, South Australia. Katarina, welcome.
Hello. First off, I'd like to say you do a wonderful job in trying to inform people, Kirralie. I do follow you on Facebook. And, look, I had, recently the most argument. I wasn't arguing. I was just saying, it's terrible that adults are allowing this to happen to children, and, that it doesn't reduce the suicide rate, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, and this lady actually ended up tagging me, and she went through all my posts on Facebook and was going, oh, look, such a bad person here. And she was a grandmother of a child who had been transgendered from a girl to a boy, and I just sort of said, well, you've got to look at the cause, at the reason why these children want to do, get put in their head that they want to do this. Because my own niece at school, like 5 kids in her class, and the classes aren't like of 50, you know, they're what, 25 or something. 5 kids in her class, all girls, all suddenly, and they were all in about 11 years old, they all suddenly decide, because of what's going on at school, the information they're given. That
Katerina, you're raising some really important points here. There's something contagious about a popular trend that's going on, and it's primarily here something to do with girls, issues in the classroom, and anecdotally, this sort of stuff is happening much more widespread than if you've got your head in the sand, or if you're in your own little bubble, even as a Christian in your own little group, where some of these things are not quite so prevalent. These things are happening more and more. Kirralie, what are your thoughts for Katerina?
Oh, thanks for your comments, Katerina. And I'm so sorry that you've been bullied and harassed on social media. It happens to all of us. And I think it comes, people, they know it's wrong. To lie to children is a really, really serious thing to do. And that's what these people are doing. They're lying to children, saying that they can change their sex when they can't. And this social contagion, I hear it all the time, that there's, particularly with girls, that whole entire classes or groups of up to 18 in a year at school are all identifying as the opposite sex. And it's absolutely, it's cruel and it's extreme for teachers, parents, grandparents to say to lie to children and say that they can change their sex, because they can't.
Katerina, thank you so much for your call. 1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation today. Let's take another call just before news, if I'm able to. I'm not connecting with that caller. We might have to come back to that one. Hey, we're just a couple of minutes out from news. The stories that are appearing on your website, detransitioner stories. Let's hope these can be just as socially contagious as the opposite way, but when people start to hear the truth, that they'll actually begin to look into some of those details. We're going to enlarge on this more after the news, but you've got a story of Judith on your website. It's a detransitioner story.
Yeah, it is. And it will probably take me more than a minute to share it, Neil, so I might share it after the news. But what I might say is that these detransitioners, we also have to keep in mind that many of them lost their community, their family, their friends when they first initially transitioned, because people didn't know how to handle it. And then when they start detransitioning, they lose community all over again from the transgender community. So a lot of compassion is needed, and a real opportunity for the church and for Christians to embrace people, to encourage them, to minister to them, and to help them sort through their identity issues, because ultimately at the end of the day, that's what we're all here on earth for, is to realise that we're sons and daughters of God, we're brothers and sisters with Christ, and we're being made ready as a bride for him.
We're going to talk about Judith's story after news. Kirralie Smith is our guest. She leads the organisation Binary. You might even want to preview that story while the news is on at binary.org.au. Check out the Binary website, binary.org.au. And we're back with more Kirralie Smith after Vision National News. It's good to have you along with us on this Wednesday edition of 2020. If you're just joining us, you're joining into a controversial and yet fascinating conversation. There are calls today to protect Australian children from being exposed to gender clinics. Our special guest today says gender clinics are destroying their young bodies and lives. A campaign's underway calling on the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, and the Attorney-General, Mark Dreyfus, to call a royal commission to protect and care for children by uncovering what's really happening in our nation's gender clinics. Kirralie Smith leads the organisation Binary, an organisation that aims to promote and honour the inherent differences between boys and girls, men and women, celebrating the true strength of the diversity those differences grant. Kirralie's been one of those prominent voices standing up to the rampant campaign to de-gender Australian society. Kirralie, we're going to get on to Judith's story in just a few moments. Before we do, let's take that call that I was trying to put to air just before the news. James is in Kyabram in Victoria. Hi, James. Welcome along.
Hi, Neil. Hi, Kirralie. Yes, thanks.
Hi, James.
I totally. Sorry.
Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Totally agree. I want to lay a little foundation just from Matthew where it talks about and will show great signs and wonders so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. And then that's Matthew 24:24. Then 2 Thessalonians says, let no one in any way deceive you. And this is the thing that I'm concerned about in the world, because I could class myself as an intercessor. I'm not saying I'm the best intercessor out there, but, like the proverb says, rebuke a wise man, he will become yet wiser. But rebuke a fool, and I can't remember the tail end of that. You might know it off by heart, Neil. But the deception that I see, that, I looked at President Obama and Michelle Obama, who I'm calling Michelle, but have recently found out is really Michael. You won't find this. A lot of Australians, you might be surprised. When the person told me, I didn't want to talk to him anymore. But apparently the brother of President Obama says that his brother is a raging homosexual. Michelle Obama is actually a man. And because they got birth certificates, had a little girl came and asked Michelle Obama, how long have you been married? She didn't know what to say. She ends up saying 20 years. And then she turns a little bit later and says, 10 years. And I thought, I've never met a woman who didn't know. This little girl, in innocence, asked a question that brought down a whole situation, and even Obama. So, but being a prayerful, we know we're not fighting against flesh and blood, but we're fighting against powers and principalities. A spirit of deception, a spirit of error can be over a whole nation because they have someone who's falsely come in, as I said there, doing great signs and wonders. Become a president of America is no small feat. And it deceived me. I saw President Obama and Michelle dancing. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. And to have that going on, and I was watching it, and I didn't pick up the deception. But
Okay.
I've been brought into the truth.
James,
And I know that
deception is one of those things that we're all got to be aware of. But if you don't know if there is anything that is absolutely true, you're very, very open to be deceived very, very easily. A thought or two here from Kirralie for James.
Well, yeah, it's deception is definitely behind what's going on with the current gender agenda and movement. We know from the very beginning of the Bible that God created male and female. Male and female, he created them and said they were very good. There's only two options, and even science, we often know that science comes into agreement with God often later down the track, but science has never been able to prove anything other than male or female sex characteristics. There is male, there is female. That's it. There is nothing else. There's no evidence. There's no proof for anything else. As I said, gender is a personality expression, and we are lying to children. We're lying to adults. We're deceiving people if we agree that someone can change their sex, because they can't. A man cannot become a woman. A woman cannot become a man. There's male, there's female. There's not all this in between. You are a male who expresses yourself in a million or an infinite amount of ways. You can be a female who expresses yourself in an infinite amount of ways, but you're still male or you're still female. So I think it's very important to be aware of those deceptions, to not come in agreement with lies, and to be like Jesus, who is the truth, and that we should be truth speakers, because that's the most loving thing that we can do.
James in Kyabram, thanks so much for your call. 1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation. Perhaps we'll take some more calls shortly, but let's get on to that detransitioner story. And I mentioned just before the news, maybe listeners will check on this one. Well, I've discovered it's so new that it's not quite on the website yet, but it's the story of Judith. Give us some insights here, Kirralie. This is an Aussie woman, and what's her story?
Yeah, look, it's a really heartbreaking interview that I did with Judith. I've been speaking with Judith for several years now. She has a daughter who, before the age of 18, was dealing with some mental health issues and depression and a few things going on. One day joined a new drama group at her school, and as one of the callers said earlier, these girls weren't 11, they were in their senior high school years, but pretty much the entire class, all the girls in this entire drama class decided that they would identify identify as boys. And Judith explains that her daughter ended up in a mental health unit in Newcastle at John Hunter, which has Maple Leaf House attached to it. So there's pretty radical gender activism going on in New South Wales, particularly in that area. They convinced Judith's daughter to go onto testosterone without Judith or her husband's consent. They removed or encouraged the daughter to move out of home to live with other gender dysphoric people. Of course, her daughter's depression was not dealt with. Her mental health issues were not dealt with. After 18 months on testosterone, her daughter decided to stop taking it. She has come home. It's not fixed by any stretch of the imagination. This poor young woman still has very serious mental health issues, but now she also has to deal with receding hairline because the testosterone causes baldness. Her voice is lowered. She's got facial hair. Her body shape has changed, and she has very serious depression and other mental health issues. When they've gone back to the clinic to get help for Judith's daughter, the clinic have basically wiped their hands and said there's nothing we can do. The health minister in New South Wales doesn't want to help. The state politicians, just throw up their hands. So, when you watch these interviews and you see these stories and you meet these people face to face, this is very traumatic. It's very heartbreaking. So Judith and three other mums have been going down to Canberra, meeting with politicians and begging them for a royal commission into gender clinic practices because, they're left on their own, they're isolated, they're traumatised, and there are no solutions for these people, and it's criminal.
If there is like a social contagion that's happening amongst children in schools, Kirralie, they're clearly being inspired by the sorts of images they're seeing in the media. People who are, declaring that I'm no longer a girl, I'm a boy, or they're going through some sort of transition and it all looks so wonderful and the glitter and all of those sorts of things. I wonder whether there is going to be a similar sort of reaction when children begin to get exposed to detransitioner stories. I wonder if you've got any thoughts here about how that can happen.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting question, and I've been talking to people around the country about this because we know that at the moment when children identify as the opposite sex or non-binary, they're celebrated, and we hear of schools holding special days like Wear It Purple Days or Rainbow Days, and they get these children up at assembly and they make a big fuss of them, and these children who were once feeling, perhaps lonely, isolated, ostracized are now celebrated and heroes. But unfortunately, when they start detransitioning, most of them have left school. They're out in the community and feel very lonely and isolated. So I think some of the things we need to do is hear their stories and tell their stories. We need to honour them. We need to celebrate them. We need to support them. We need to come around them to help them in a lot of ways because identity is an issue for all human beings. Every single one of us has had to work through, who our identity. And as Christians, we know that our identity doesn't come from who we are, but from who God is and who he says we are. But for so many people, that they haven't had that opportunity or that experience. So I think there's a really unique time now where we can come alongside, we can financially support those who are battling against the health system. We can offer safe places, counselling, respect and honour to those people. And also we need other young voices to speak out. There are young voices on social media, that make transitioning look so attractive, but they tell lies and they don't tell the full story. So we actually need other young people who are going to get on those social media platforms and encourage young girls to be girls. And if they want to be masculine in that, that's okay. And we want to encourage young boys to be boys. And if they have feminine expressions, that's okay as well. They don't have to take dramatic steps like drugs or surgery. But yeah, they can express themselves in many different ways. So I think there's a real opportunity for young Christian, conservative, strongly identified people to start standing up and speaking out and encouraging their peers to embrace who they are without that sort of medicalised pathway.
Let's take another call. Tracy is in Nanango in Queensland. Hi, Tracy. Welcome along.
Hello. I just wanted to say with this gender thing that's going on with children, I mean, it's just, it's gobsmacking, really. I mean, children can't make decisions for their life, especially in a young age. And, I mean, they shouldn't even be allowed to make these decisions when they have no the mentality of the long-term repercussions of these decisions, let alone, when I was 16, I mean, I was still making mistakes, and even as I got older. So it's just absolutely shocking. I just can't comprehend what's going on with our children. It's terrible.
Well, we might know that our children are not mature enough to make these sorts of decisions. But Kirralie, there are all sorts of academics, no doubt, working in universities and research departments all over this nation who are coming up with all sorts of reports saying this is all good. Otherwise, surely our legislators wouldn't be following this line. What's happening to our educators, our researchers, our university professors, that these sorts of things have gone so haywire?
Yeah, well, I mean, we know the education system in Australia has been infiltrated by radical left-wing activists, ideologues, people who really just want to try and justify and excuse their own poor decisions and capture as many young minds as they can. The fact is, not enough research or studies have been done because universities refuse to fund those studies or allow academics to go down that pathway. They cancel them, they withdraw funding or withhold funding in these areas. But we have enough scientific evidence, as we said earlier, whether it's, we know brain development, we know the sort of decisions and capabilities that children have. And there is no way on earth that children can consent to puberty blockers. They can't consent to being sterile as adults. They can't consent to having zero sexual function. A 12-year-old doesn't know what it would be like to be married and have a healthy sexual relationship with their spouse. So they can't consent to these puberty blockers. And unfortunately, there's too many activists in the healthcare system, the education system, bureaucrats basically in this nation who are unaccountable, unelected, and are making these outrageous decisions for our children. And it is going to require the church, parents, and concerned citizens to really stand up as one and draw a line in the sand and say enough is enough. And so that's why our organisation exists. There's some others that do similar work, but we're in this space to make sure that our numbers and our voices count for the sake of these children, because it is absolutely so harmful and devastating what is going on in the name of this ideology.
Let me go out on a little bit of a limb here, a little bit of a risk. I've still got Tracy on the line from Nanango, a beautiful small country town there in the South Burnett in Queensland. Tracy, as you're calling in and you're a concerned maybe parent or grandparent, are you noticing anything in your community about the way kids are behaving? Is this perhaps partly what prompts you to make a call today? Is this something you're seeing in your community?
Well, I drive school buses, so I am with a lot of children regularly, and one day I had sitting behind me there was about 6 young children. I mean, the eldest was probably 9 and the others were 6 and 7, and a young boy said, "Oh, when I grow up I'm going to marry a man," and then the young girl said, "Well, when I grow up I'm going to marry a woman," and then they said to me, "Well, what do you think?" And I really had to bite my tongue because you're not allowed to say anything. And I just said, well, apparently you're allowed to. I said, but it's wrong. And I mean, what can you say? It's because if I say something, then they go and tell their teacher or their mother, then I'm going to be in big trouble and probably lose my job,
Well, Tracy, appreciate you sharing that. And there you go. I mean, when we talk about doing university research, what we've just done is we've heard some research from a country town in Queensland, and it's significant just to hear this sort of response from someone who is actually seeing these children on a day-to-day basis. And I want to thank you so much, Tracy, for sharing that. Kirralie, lots of people like Tracy feeling like they've got to hold their tongue. Is it true that you've got to hold your tongue, or how do you think you should respond?
I think every situation is different, Neil, and I guess individuals have to assess that for themselves. I'd say a couple of things there. One is please contact us at Binary, info@binary.org.au, if you have testimonies like that, because a lot of politicians don't believe this is happening because they're not hearing it from people. So I say to you, Tracy, and to anyone who's listening, if you have stories like that, please write them down. I will ensure your anonymity if that is what you ask. I will only ever share stories that I'm given permission to share. Like, Judith gave me permission to share that story, so I shared it. There are hundreds of people who contact me that don't want their stories shared, but they're happy for me to collate these stories so that I've got evidence to present to these politicians to show them that this is exactly what is happening in our communities and we need to do something about it. I think that some people really need to sit before God. And, Tracy, if you're part of a church, go to your church, ask people to pray with you, talk to your pastor. But it is going to require at some point for more people to stand up and speak out. And there'll be unique ways to do that. And in that situation, talking to the children may not be the most appropriate thing, or, losing your job over that may not be the most appropriate thing. But there are steps that can be taken. Our website sets some of those things up, and you can contact me directly and I can help you navigate some of those things. But as Christians, as churches, I think churches are the ones that are responsible now to start speaking into this space, to educate children, to encourage families, and to give them a place where it's safe to say marriage is between a man and a woman, and this is the best thing, for a healthy, happy, long life. And we've got to reclaim the culture in that sense.
Tracy, well done, and be encouraged, and continue to exercise wisdom. Thank you so much for your call. We're almost out of time. Let's take one more call. Carol is in Aloomba in North Queensland, near Cairns. Hello, Carol. Welcome along.
Oh, hello. How are you?
Very well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I want to know, this transgenderism is here with us. And as a Christian and as a grandmother and a great-grandmother, I want to know, and as a person who's in a church, a large church, if somebody, my heart, I'm thinking about the ones who've already had the surgery and that. And if someone got saved, one of them, if they got saved and came to church or came to me, is there somewhere, where do they go for help?
A good question there, Carol. Kirralie, where do you go for help? If this is impacting you, in your family, in your church, you can see your neighbours struggling with this, where do you go for help?
Yeah, well, great question and comment, Carol. And I think we're going to see that increasing a lot as well. So first of all, the church should be a place, one, where we love all kinds of people. It doesn't matter whether they're transgender, adulterers, thieves, murderers, whoever it is. We're called to be Jesus to each of those people. So that is definitely the first port of call. But then there are specialists and support groups. Again, through Binary, we can put you in touch with those sort of people. First and foremost, when dealing with individuals, it is essential to dignify and respect an individual, regardless of their beliefs, regardless of their behaviour, to a degree. But there are resources, there are groups, there are people, there are psychologists, there are doctors who can help those people. But it's all about relationship. Build a relationship with those people, and then look for those resources. Contact me at Binary, and we'll help you.
Wonderful. Carol, thank you so much for your call. Time is running out. We mentioned right at the top, and we've begun to discuss all sorts of challenges there around a call for a royal commission. When people go to the new, fresh, refreshed Binary website, is there something there that you can get on board and be a part of what's happening so far as the call for a royal commission, or just to be a part of the team? No doubt there'll be all sorts of subscriber lists that are continuing to grow for you, Kirralie. And last time we spoke, there was something like 60,000 who were getting your email subscription. How are things continuing here, and how can people get on board with what you're doing?
Yeah, look, we're growing all the time. I don't have the updated numbers, but I know it's up around 70,000 now, which is really exciting and encouraging for people. But on the new website, there's petitions that you can sign. So there is a specific petition for a royal commission into gender clinics. So please go ahead and sign that. That will also sign you up for our weekly e-news, that you'll get updates of what's happening in Australia and around the world. There's also a volunteer portal now, which is really exciting, so that state groups and local groups can take action. So we will be doing things along the lines of letterbox dropping, door knocking, coordinated campaigns in calling or contacting local politicians or schools or libraries, whatever it is. So as we grow that volunteer base, we will be able to take actions, perhaps even have some rallies, have some public meetings and do things like that. So it really is next level that Binary is going to now, thanks to the support of our incredible supporters so far, but that just continues to grow every single day.
Well, Kirralie, honour to you. You're leading the organisation Binary. I'll point listeners to visit that website. All sorts of ways listeners can participate in the good work you're doing. Binary.org.au. That's binary.org.au. Kirralie Smith, thanks so much for joining us today on 2020.
Thank you for having me, Neil.